Alrighty. So, we good? We live? All right, everyone. Thanks for giving me about 5 extra minutes to set the rest of my materials up. I'm Billy Garretsen. I'm with GameSalad's Game Team 1, the internal game team, and this webinar is going to be focusing a whole lot on the principles of game design and trying to train yourself on how to think like a game designer. We may touch on implementation with GameSalad a little bit, but this is really more of a conceptual presentation. So let's just jump right in.
Tell them about we'll do moderated questions.
Oh, there we go. So we have scheduled 90 minutes for this webinar, and we might be able to get through it in about 60 as far as the presentation goes, and then we're trying to leave as much time as possible for a Q&A session afterwards. And so, we can use that extra time to get y'all's feedback and ideas after I've kind of gone through all the material. So please, if you have any questions, Lauren, are we taking them in the chat log or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so go ahead and type out your questions and send them in the chat log, and Lauren will go ahead and collect all those questions, and we'll touch on them after the formal presentation is done.
And go.
Awesome. So just to give you a little glimpse as to what we're going to cover today, I'm going to go very briefly over a little bit of my background, so you guys know that I'm not just making stuff up, and then we're going to go a little bit into like kind of the overall core principles of games and game design, and then we're going to go through kind of my process that I've kind of developed over the years on how I approach game design, and hopefully some of the exercises that I clue you in on will help you guys in the future with your game designs. So first off, a little bit about me. My background is in art. I'm a traditionally trained artist, and in college I learned how to use the computer to do digital art, and I learned Illustrator. And after I graduated, I worked at a company called Multimedia Games for about 7 years, where I did illustration and some game design for casino slot machines. And in 2007, I formed my own independent studio that I maintained on the side, and I've produced and developed right around 10 independent titles. And overall in my career, I've had over 50 titles to date under my belt. And if you can see this slide, I have held a number of roles on each one of those games. So everything from director, designer to art direction to illustration, even down into musical composition and writing. So and I've been doing this for about 10 years now. My first commercially released game I made when I was 19. So I've been at this for a while, and I've been able to see game development from a lot of different perspectives. And so hopefully you guys can see that that gives me a certain, I guess, a vantage point from any aspect of game development. So let's talk a little bit about why we're here, why I'm here, leading this webinar, why you guys are interested in listening, and I have a couple kind of statements here. Essentially, they're value propositions, right? Why are we here? We love playing games. We love solving problems. We love art and music. There's so many things of why we're here, and it's all driven by passion. For some reason, games interest us, and we're passionate about them, almost obsessively passionate about them. And being passionate about games is the key to being great game makers, because it's not a profession or even a hobby that anyone should take lightly. I mean, game development is extremely involved, and it's easy for people to become overwhelmed. And it really does. There's a weed out factor. Not everyone can actually stomach a life in game development, because it's a lot of thankless hours, and really the only person that can keep you going is yourself, and your own passion and drive to do it. So hopefully everyone who's attending, hopefully that applies to you, that you're here because no matter what, you're going to make it happen because you're passionate about your interest in games. All right, so we're just going to kind of blow through all this stuff. So here is where we kind of start getting to the meat of designing a game. Now, forgive me if some of this stuff is completely elementary to you. If you also have made a couple games, a lot of this stuff really is basic, so you can tune out for the next couple minutes. But no, honestly, But for anyone who is interested and doesn't really have a formal background in game development or hasn't read any white papers and stuff, you can really boil a game down to its essentially its presentation. So that would be like the graphics, visual presentation, the game mechanics, which would be the elements that the player actually is engaged with, and then the audio, essentially additional feedback. So arguably graphics and audio both tie into presentation. But I kind of hold them differently because when you think about the construction of a game, both those things, are typically held differently. Sometimes some games kind of require graphics and audio to be really, really closely tied together. Um, I do recommend reading The Art of Game Design, A Book of Lenses by Jesse Schell, um, because it goes a lot into this. And there's a little diagram here in the slide that I took from his book that offers essentially, instead of three parts to a game, he offers a tetrad, essentially a four part diagram for what makes up a game. And so I don't necessarily agree 100% with his diagram, but it's a valid point of view. But when you start to think about what a game is, I have boiled it down to essentially the graphics, the game mechanics, and essentially the audio presentation, because all those things give feedback to essentially the core. The core is the game mechanics, so that's where you should focus most of your attention, because without that, you have no game. That's the thing that makes games different from books, movies, television, and radio. So understanding what makes a game is really important because you'll have to know how to play to the strengths of the medium. So again, if anyone has any questions about this part, this is the very very kind of basic nuggets of what makes a game. If you have any questions, please jot them down, and I can come back to this part to kind of flesh it out. But I'm going to give you guys the benefit of the doubt that you've already done some homework in this area.
They can type them throughout, and we'll revisit.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'm trying to just get to the most interesting parts of here. So this is where I think things get really interesting. So great. You got GameSalad, or you got another platform, whatever, or just even a piece of paper and a pen, and you are like, yes, I'm going to design a game. So where do you begin? And many of you may have heard, and it's a valid principle, right? That anything can inspire a game. Television and movies can inspire a game. We see it all the time. Life can inspire a game. Emotions can inspire a game. Your feeling of frustration in your life, or your feeling of pride and love, all those things can inspire the elements that ultimately become your game. Classic kind of anecdote is the game Pikmin. Hopefully you guys are familiar with this game because it's a very, very, very well-made game, even if it's not Nintendo's most popular franchise. At a time when Miyamoto was experiencing some of his greatest success in his career, he was finding inspiration in nature. So he would take kind of walks for serenity in his garden, and then he started to be inspired by that. He started to think, well, what if this environment that I take for granted, what if I was overwhelmed by it? What if I was tiny and I would, it's almost like the Honey I Shrunk the Kids um, moment that he felt, and then he was compelled to translate that awe and wonder into a game. And I think there's even documented interviews where he says a similar kind of sense of exploration of the natural environment is what inspired Zelda. So things completely non-related to games can inspire games very, very heavily. If you're an artist, and I certainly have come from this approach where I love character design, and I'll think of really, really cool characters, really cool costumes, and then from there, mechanics flow. I'm like, oh, cool. This, like, I have a picture of a guy, a drawing here with a guy with a sword, and then what that does is that kind of inspires. Okay, well, I'm gonna have some action. There's gonna be some really cool, sword play. Maybe there's some upgrades, etc. Um, and so yeah, so essentially, you can start anywhere and come up with a game design from it. So you kind of should feel not tied down by any one specific method. Now, as I guess as evidenced by how many clones we see in our GameSalad community, um, you can tell that imitation is widely accepted, and it's really a great place for a lot of new developers to begin, because sometimes you don't have the maturity as a designer to know exactly what you want to make, and the best way to tackle that particular problem is to look at the games that have inspired you to make games, and then try to recreate those experiences. And through recreating those experiences, you're going to learn a lot more about how to construct games and what worked and what didn't. And then you can use that in your future designs to make something a little bit more original. So there's certainly no shame in trying to imitate something that's already been done, because even the biggest developers do that. They take what works in another game that they're inspired by, and then they try to mix it up a little bit in their own kind of unique portrayal of that. So, um, kind of going bullet by bullet in this design process checklist. Remember that the whole point is to have a really nice fleshed out design up front, because it's easier to change your mind and it's easier to change direction early on. If you've ever tried to add a feature after you're halfway done with your actual development, you'll notice that it takes like twice or more of the work, because you have to unravel so many of the systems that you've already created. So the discipline that you have to try to get yourself in, the mode you're trying to get yourself into, is trying to think through your design very thoroughly before you've even started creating game logic. Um, so, you're not tied down at the inception of your game design. You shouldn't feel very, very tied down. You should feel more free than ever to explore every possibility and just kind of map it out and figure out what works and what's going to be really interesting before you actually start creating game logic. So, general rule of thumb: if it can work on paper, it can probably work on screen. A lot of people actually make paper prototypes of their games, even action games. They'll kind of like pantomime through their game design using paper cutouts or representational materials like Lego blocks. And really, if you can kind of work out your ideas on some kind of physical medium, chances are it'll translate really, really well to the digital medium. And then not everyone from the outset has artistic and visual talent, but I think that developing those skills is going to be very, very important for you as a designer, because being able to document your ideas visually is really important, because as a designer you're going to need buy-in at some point from someone, whether it's another developer to help you out with your game, or whether it's your audience, or someone who's going to help push your game out there. So you have to be able to, you know, even if it's stick figures, you have to be able to portray your idea in some sort of visual format in order to, validate your own ideas and then maybe get validation from collaborators. So, those are the kinds of things to know as you go into creating a new game. So the high level objectives, again, these are things that are very hard to know if you're very early on in your game career, but you have to understand the difference between the meat of your game and the potatoes, right? What are the things that your game has to have versus what are the nice to haves, the things that, if they got cut out, your actual initial vision or intention would not be harmed in any way. So as an extension of that, you need to be able to hammer down the handful of mechanics that really define your game and the vision. And I will be going into that aspect of it very, very deeply here in an exercise I'm going to do in a couple slides. So where it gets interesting again is when you start thinking about how genre can dictate your graphical presentation, which can also dictate your control schemes, and how um, so many decisions can be made from just one decision up front as to what genre you're trying to tackle, or what POV, whether it's top down, isometric, etc. Like how many other design decisions just inherently get made for you, and knowing what those decisions are, because you don't want to paint yourself into a corner too early. So, and I'll go a little bit more into that in just a second. Um, so it's about having discipline to kind of to hammer it, nail down a couple of principles that you know that your game has to have, but make it very broad. So don't say that your game has to have a chaining combo system in order for it to be a successful game. Tell yourself your game just has to have a dynamic scoring system, and from there you can say, okay, it's got chain combos, or no, it's got a stacking multiplier, or try to boil it down to something that is specific enough that you can keep track of what your ideas are, but keep it vague enough to where you leave wiggle room, because the whole process that we're trying to develop here is a means to um, organize your thoughts into something that could be turned into a very awesome game design. So let's go ahead and move forward, and let's talk a little bit about core theme and mechanics, and how much impact a core theme can actually have over your approach and direction in a game. Give me just a second. I'm going to take a little sip of water. Any problems so far? Everyone can hear me, you think?
Yeah, no problems. Got some good questions coming in that I'm writing down for later.
Faux show. All right. Core theme and mechanics. I can go really deep into this, but rather than that, let's use one example of a core theme. A core theme of size and scale. Now we've already talked a little bit about Pikmin, and I have a few videos here that I want to show. If anyone is not familiar with Pikmin, I'm just going to let this run for a couple seconds. So Pikmin, you take the role of a small alien character that lands on essentially a world where he is miniature, and the world is giant. And so what would normally be a very, very simple, environmental element to us, like rocks and hills and dirt, end up being extreme barriers to the characters. And like there's even characters that'll drown in water because they're so small that they can't swim. And so this game is all about navigating a terrain that we take for granted, using some light RTS elements, right? So the sense of scale in this game is meant to bring wonder to an environment that we would normally take for granted, and also use scale to its advantage, right? So like you use common everyday things like logs and stuff as bridges, and so it starts to kind of redefine your expectations of the natural world, which again it's completely inspired just by that simple theme of scale, size, and scale. So let's jump over to a game, Shadow of the Colossus. Hopefully, you guys are familiar with this game. It's terrific. It's a masterpiece of execution in this core theme of scale and size, but they do it in the complete opposite direction, right? Where Pikmin puts you in a miniature role, within an environment that we normally see as a small, environment, and now it's made big. Shadow of the Colossus does the opposite, right? The main protagonist is normal human size, and now you're up against these adversaries that are larger than life. And that one core mechanic that drives this game ultimately, is taken in a different direction, and the game is completely different, right? And it has a completely different experience for the player itself. And so a couple other examples that are on this slide that again take the exact same core theme of scale. You've got Army Men, right, which is a little closer to Pikmin because you are a small object inside of a giant environment, right, which is normal size to us, and but their direction is less otherworldly. You're not an alien. You're like a person in the real world playing with toys, and common objects become strategic elements in your game. Where you're building items with those objects that you use them as weapons, you use them as barricades. Actually, similar in a way that you use objects in Little Big Planet, but the gameplay is really different, right? So Army Men is an isometric RTS game. Little Big Planet is largely a 2D side-scrolling game, even though there is a slight bit of multiplanar, movement in and out of the depth field. But it plays like a 2D side-scrolling game like Mario. But again, the theme of scale is the driving mechanic for so many design choices for the game. It takes place in a lot of kind of like true life scale environments where you're like a small object that has to interact with stuff like skateboards, but the skateboard is so big that it's almost like a car, and so it redefines your expectations of things that we normally take for granted. And then again, I'm not sure if a lot of people are aware of the game Mushroom Men for the Wii, but it was developed by our friends here in Austin, Redfly Studios, um, and they take scale again in a really similar direction as like something like Little Big Planet, except it's a full-on 3D action platforming game, kind of like Mario 64 and Banjo Kazooie. So again, there is one driving theme that ties all these games together, and that's size and scale. But the gameplay for each one of these games is completely different. So you can see how even just one choice up front can lead to so many different outcomes. And it's just it's really good to know what your core themes are. So you could say my core theme is size and scale. I'm going to manipulate people's expectations of size and scale, but then and then you can do the Shadow of the Colossus route and say I'm going to be regular size and everything around me is just going to be larger than life. Or you could do the Pikmin route of I'm going to be tiny and everything around me is going to be regular sized. Um, so hopefully you guys follow what I mean when like when I say a core theme really can drive every other decision that you make in the game. So one thing that you should definitely try to discipline yourself to do is to reinforce your core themes with everything that you put in your game. Everything from font to art style to sound to control scheme to level progression. Everything should tie back into your core theme. So where are we at? A little after 15 minutes?
About 20 minutes.
Okay, cool. So we could talk more about theme here in a little bit, but I do want to add again something that you end up learning after making a lot of games is just the difficulty in the different kinds of games based on something that again a lot of people who haven't made a lot of games you take genre and you take point of view completely for granted. You think that just because it utilizes 2D graphics that it's going to be easy to do, and I've made a very rough kind of chart here on the right that shows the difficulty curve as far as how many systems you have to build and how many features and elements of your game you have to flesh out based on genre. So let's talk about genre. Let's talk about genre and POV. Um, so there are certain genres, right? When we say a genre, I mean something like RPG or real-time strategy or side-scrolling or top-down shooter. All those are genres. Each one of those genres kind of has an inherited point of view, right? So essentially a camera position or a presentation style that makes a whole lot of sense. Like for instance, you can't get away from like a social farming game these days without it being uh, an isometric kind of point of view. And there's a lot of kind of technical things that fall along with that decision. So first thing to think of is if you say, hey, I want to make a game that's just like Diablo. Um, you know if you think, yes, I'm going to make it just like Diablo, then that kind of implies that you're going to make it a kind of an isometric, top-down isometric game. Now, obviously, there are Diablo-inspired games that are flat 2D or flat top-down 2D, but for the most part, if you're trying to make a direct clone, it's going to be an isometric game. And then one of the things you should know is making isometric games is not easy. It's certainly not the easiest genre to do. And if you're not wanting to put in that much effort, you should maybe think about doing a different genre. Um, and so I think if anyone has questions right now about specific genres and difficulty, please jot them down because I'm really paraphrasing a lot of this right now, and I'd be plenty happy to talk about it because I've made almost every genre that you can make, including 3D games, and I can kind of tell you anecdotally like what my experiences were like making those types of games. Um, and then so POV. Um, I just touched a little bit on how POV can really affect not only the difficulty of creating your game, but just how the player's enjoyment is affected by it. So down here in the bottom left corner, I have four specific POV types, right? We kind of have this like first person kind of 3D type, and faked 3D perspective, and then we have a flat 2D side scrolling perspective, and then we have an isometric perspective with RC Pro Am, and then we have a flat top down. Um, Now, the player, even though you're doing almost the same thing in each game, you're racing a car or you're utilizing some sort of vehicle to navigate either a track or an environment, the player is going to experience each one of those games very, very differently. And it has a lot to do with um, not just the graphic presentation and the POV, but also the controls, right, that go along with it. So like a side-scrolling game is going to control differently than a top-down game, for instance, and certainly going to control differently than an isometric game. So be really aware that what your player can and can't see and and how much control they feel that they have over what they're experiencing can really make or break how much they enjoy the game because games unless your theme is about fear, um, games are really most effective when they're empowering, right? When people play the game and they're kind of they feel empowered to solve whatever puzzle or whatever action challenges come their way because they feel comfortable with the controls and they feel comfortable with their abilities, and your POV is kind of your first kind of foot in the door to again make or break that experience for the player. So um, let's go into the technical considerations based on the POV, and I'll kind of explain what this chart is. So let's start with a top-down game, something like a top-down shooter like Space Invaders or Galaga. Um, when you navigate that environment, you're only dealing with essentially two axes, right? You're dealing with vertical and horizontal movement, and whether it's like essentially a side-scrolling shooter or a straight up top down where the enemies are coming from the top as opposed from the side, they're largely only going to have you move into two axes, right? With like a direction, like a controller pad or something like that, and that is simpler than a side scroller. And I'll get into side scrollers in just a second. So, um, and I have these colors that kind of break down like the difference between direct control and passive control. Let me really quickly define what I mean by that. Direct control means that you literally control everything that your player object is doing, right? So if you have a ship that can move up, down, left, and right and shoot, you literally have buttons or some sort of interface on screen that allows you to do all of those things 100%. Passive control is a simplification of control that allows the player to make certain key decisions while the rest is automated. So, for instance, a point and click adventure, most times you're not necessarily controlling the player the whole time, but you point and click on an area on the screen to create a waypoint, and then that character moves towards that waypoint. So you essentially set the location that you want the player to go, and then the computer kind of takes care of the rest and can course correct if needed. So um, passive control for like a top down experience is almost identical as far as the complexity to build it as direct control because yeah, you're just dealing with very fewer control axes essentially. But then as you get to these other genres, stuff like flat side scrollers versus multiplanar side scrollers versus like an isometric scrolling game, um, that's when passive control starts to become essentially the easier method because you have less control schemas for the player to essentially hurt themselves with, right? The more control you give the player, the more complicated your game is going to be to test and perfect and tweak because just anything can happen when the player's in the pilot seat, so in the pilot's chair. So again, please write down specific questions if you want to go further into that. Just otherwise follow this kind of loosely as a guide to complexity. My first game that I ever made was a side scroller because I thought it would be easy. Because who hasn't played Mario? The first game on Nintendo. Who hasn't played endless side scrollers? And I'll tell you what, I took it completely for granted just because of how many controls that I had to work on. I had to work on running, jumping, ducking, crawling, attacking, climbing ladders, climbing side ladders, climbing front-facing ladders, switching weapons. all of a sudden this thing blows up, and like my expectations were completely blown out of the water. We completely blew scope, and development went on about 6 months more than it had to, all because I underestimated the complexity of a side scroller. So um, let's talk about the difference between a flat side scroller versus a multiplanar side scroller. So a multiplanar side scroller is going to be something like a brawler, like Double Dragon or Final Fight, where your movement is left to right, but you have some degree of movement in and out of the depth field, right? And it's all fake. Like these are 2D engines, they're not 3D engines, so it's a faked kind of depth, right? So uh, in a typical kind of side-scrolling game, like the up button will, it'll either jump or it'll navigate certain level components like ladders, or it'll climb up ledges and things like that. But for instance, in something like a multiplanar side-scrolling game, up and down will move you in and out of the depth plane. So that's another example of how a point of view can affect even like the control scheme of your game. So like up and down are going to behave much differently in a flat side scrolling game like Mario or Sonic versus how up and down controls in a multiplanar game like Final Fight. And knowing the difference up front really helps when you're starting to map out your game ideas. Okay, so um, and just kind of going along the theme of like what's easy, what's hard. If you have a game where you have a static camera, so like let's think of like let's think of a GameSalad game like something like Zombie Drop, right, where each level is kind of its own self-contained scene, right? There's really not a moving camera, and everything kind of takes place within kind of one viewpoint. A game like that is going to be easier to create than a game that has a moving camera, because once you create a moving camera, then you have to create a system for that movement. Is that camera going to move off of like what the player is doing? Is that camera going to move based on like if you have a game like Zelda, like the original Zelda, where the camera is going to move when the player hits a certain edge of the screen, right? So if it hits the top edge of the screen, then the camera is going to pan up real quickly to reveal the next room. Um, versus a persistent scrolling camera, right? Something like in a Mario game. And then you have games that are kind of a mix of the two, right? So like Mega Man. Mega Man has level segments that utilize moving camera, and then you essentially get to the end of that level segment and hit the edge, and it loads up the next level segment. So there's kind of a mix between kind of a moving camera versus essentially a changing scene transition, etc. So just remember that that's an element that you're going to have to make a decision about, no matter what kind of game you're making. And so I already kind of went a little bit over the top-down versus flat side-scrolling versus multiplanar side-scrolling. One thing I don't have listed here is isometric. Currently, it's a little difficult to do isometric in GameSalad without doing a lot of extra work to handle the depth. Now, it's not impossible, so I'm not going to dissuade anybody from trying. We've done some stuff internally like Hobo with a Shotgun, which is a Double Dragon style game where we pulled off, in a kind of a non-elegant way, we pulled off a depth effect that rivals that of Final Fight. So just know that if you want to do like a genre merge, like you say, I want to do a platforming game, but I want it to be isometric, like let's say like Super Mario RPG. If you look at this video, Mario's moving in an isometric space, but he also is doing platforming. Um, just know that you're adding a multiplier to your game now. So however hard it was going to be to do an isometric game on its own versus how hard it was going to do a 2D side-scrolling platforming game, if you combine the two, you're literally multiplying the work of the two into one another. So again, that's not to say like don't do it. I mean, you should feel empowered to go in whatever direction you want. I'm just trying to kind of clue you into some of the things that I've learned over my time making games that that's just going to be a lot harder to do than like just say a flat top-down game. But if you can pull it off, you're looking at a game that a lot of people are probably going to be more compelled by. And then lastly, things to consider up front when you're building your game is does the game progression happen room by room, where, like I just said about like Zelda or Mega Man, where you've created these kind of gameplay segments that you tie into one another to create an entire level sequence, versus something that has no boundaries. So, trying to think of a good example of a game. I think the game Vector Man on Sega Genesis is a good example of, essentially, I think the levels are essentially one big scene. So you can navigate an entire level, and some of them can take up to like 10 minutes to finish. Actually, Sonic the Hedgehog is a great example. The original Sonic the Hedgehog, the entire level was one seamless experience until you reach the end of the level kind of checkmark sign. So you got to know up front, are you gonna do room by room, or are you gonna do open world? I'll tell you, it's a lot easier to do room by room, because you cut your testing multiplier down, because each change you make can be isolated to one scene, and you can kind of tweak each room to perfection, as opposed to, you might have one change in an open world environment that essentially snowballs into a change that has to get made across the board to every element in that open world scene. So just know that if you want to have, faster debugging of your game and design, you might want to go room by room. But again, point being, don't feel dissuaded to go in whatever direction you want to go. Just know, what you're getting yourself into, just so that you don't get yourself in a situation like I was when I was a teenager, where I thought making, a Castlevania style game would be completely trivial and that I could do it in 3 months, and it turned into a year-long project. So, save yourself some of that time by knowing what to expect. So this is kind of the meat of what this presentation is. I imagine I've kind of blown through all the material up until this point, and that's so that I can get to this part faster. And don't hold that against me. Hopefully, when we give the PDF of this slideshow later on, you guys can kind of read through the material. It'll hopefully make sense with you. I really want it to stick with you. But what I'm about to do is I'm going to explain the process that I go about to make my games. And I'm hoping that you guys can adopt it. So this slide right here really focuses on being able to document your ideas visually. Now, I know that the majority, if not all of you, have at least seen a flow chart, right? A flow chart is essentially logic that's put down into some sort of visual format, whether it's written down on paper or if it's done using, I think Microsoft has a couple of tools. Atlassian has a couple of cool tools. Either it's Atlassian, or I don't know who makes the tool Glyphy, but I know that it can plug into the Atlassian tool set. But they essentially allow you to visualize concepts and organize your ideas into flowcharts, right? Dependencies. So like if-then statements, like, if character touches hazard, then character loses life. And then it kind of goes from there, and you kind of create statements essentially. And so you're visualizing what will eventually be code or logic in GameSalad. You're visualizing that on paper, okay? So that's what a flow chart is. But what I'm about to show you is something that you may or may not be familiar with, and it's something that I call thought mapping. So it's creating a thought map. And other people have similar things, and they've coined different phrases, and maybe I'm using a phrase that someone else is using too. But the process of making a thought map is something that I actually kind of had to develop on my own. Um, and I found that it's made my job very, very easy to do when you think about coming up with design. So in a nutshell, what a thought map is literally it is a visualization of your stream of consciousness thought process when you're trying to come up with your game. A thought map is not a game design, right? A thought map leads to a game design. But what a thought map is, it's you literally it's you establishing the core elements of your game, and then brainstorming out from there visually in a very easy to kind of organize way. And then you use that as the basis to create your actual game design document, right? And your game design document is going to have a lot more elements than just a bunch of ideas. It's going to have maybe actual documentation for the systems you're going to build, or it's going to have artwork or whatever. So at this point, you don't need artwork. This is literally conceptualizing, but in a very, very organized way. So I'm gonna jump into Illustrator, anyone who doesn't use Illustrator, I would definitely advise you. I mean, you don't have to be an artist to use Illustrator. Illustrator is a fantastic brainstorming tool because it allows you to manipulate the blocks that you're building very, very quickly, right? And there's other tools too. So if you guys do use Gliffy, that's fine. Go ahead and use whatever works for you. But the idea here is to use a tool that allows you to um, create your thoughts into something visual so that you can very quickly organize them and see your thought process, but in a visual way, and it's really cool when it works. So anyone who doesn't have Adobe Illustrator, I'll let you know. Post-it notes, right? Being able to brainstorm concepts and just write the concept down on a post-it note and putting it in front of you, and then you can start to move the post-it notes around. The whole goal here is to create something that you can actually move around and manipulate and create hierarchies. So I guess without further ado, I'm going to switch over to Illustrator. Um, and so I've built a couple, basic components here. So I'm going to show you what like a thought map would look like if I were to create a top-down shooting game that takes place in a zombie apocalypse. And hopefully you guys can follow along. So kind of utilizing, and I've created different like kind of visual starting points here for the things I'm going to do. So, okay, so what I just said, what was my core concept, right? It is a top-down shooter, okay? And then I said it was post-apocalyptic, right? And we're fighting zombies. So high-level theme, we say it's so let me narrow it down because post-apocalyptic, um, actually here. So post is it apocalyptic? Forgive my spelling if I made that wrong. Tweak the font here real quick. All right. So post-apocalyptic, I want it to take place in an urban environment. Okay, so all I'm doing right now is I'm just thinking, right? And you see how all these thoughts are kind of, their own little chunks, right? Post-apocalyptic urban environment. I said it was, against zombies. So let's say, okay, so we know that it's a shooter. We know that there's going to be enemies. Okay, and from there we know that, maybe we want those enemies to be zombies. So I'm going to keep these ideas close to one another, the ones that kind of lead to the next, um, the next thought. You want to keep them kind of close together so you can kind of backtrack and make sure that everything flows back to your original intention. All right, so uh, other decisions that I want to make right now. Let's say I want to make this easy, right? The whole reason why I went with the top-down shooters is because it's something manageable. So let's say there's no storyline. Let's say that this game is arcade. So you know that it's an arcade game, which means that it's going to be all about scoring, right? There's no bigger goal in the game except to score the highest score. And because we're against zombies, let's say another core theme that we have is survival, right? Survival is a theme, right? There's so many mechanics that we can utilize to reinforce the theme of survival. Okay, so now we're just kind of, you know, getting started, right? We haven't really built any mechanics, right? We've just kind of created elements, right? We've created themes and components to what this game is going to be. All right, so I'm going to start branching out now. I'm going to start building in components to each one of these high-level themes, right? So if it's an urban environment, maybe I say, okay, it's a street, right? So maybe the background is a street because I'm top down. Oh wait, what do streets have? Streets have stuff like manholes, and then all of a sudden I'm starting to think, wait a second. I remember playing in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle arcade game that whenever I walked near a manhole, I could fall into it and I would lose life. So I'd say, oh wait a second. So maybe manholes could be like traps. And then it starts to really branch out now where I'm organically thinking about how one thing can lead to the next. So I went from urban environment to street to manholes, manholes to traps because I can fall into them. But wait a second, why stop there? maybe enemies can fall into traps. Maybe I start building a system where I can lure enemies into traps. So enemy traps. What else could be traps, right? We have manholes, and we also have maybe because it's post-apocalyptic, maybe there's like fire hazards, right? There's just stuff that's on fire, and maybe you can burn, maybe the enemies can burn. So we say fire hazards. So traps came from manholes, but what this really goes to show is like you could start to build your hierarchy where maybe now you put traps up here and you kind of create your hierarchy, and then you understand that manholes and fire hazards fall underneath traps, right? So you're organizing your thoughts, right? And so now that you've established, like, wow, I'm really liking this. From urban environment, I got all the way down into having traps in my game, and now there's all sorts of things that I can use as traps. And if I'm gonna be able to lure enemies into traps, maybe this starts to affect my arcade scoring theme. If score is really all I'm about, you want to have the maximum amount of range in your score and in your score potential in order to get people to feel like there's always room for improvement, right? I mean that's kind of just a design thing to know. But if you're going to have a scoring system, make it dynamic. Make it feel like if am I going to have bonus points? Am I going to have multipliers? So I put bonus points. I put multipliers. These are all elements. We haven't committed to anything. We're just putting all of our ideas down, right? And then we can come back in and edit later. And this ties directly into traps. So do we say, hey, if you shoot an enemy and you push the enemy into a manhole to finish him off, do we have a combo system? Do we have a chain system? Um, Now, all those things are really cool. Um, and yeah, at this point, I don't think you should cut anything. You should kind of see where your thoughts lead you, because that's the whole point of this exercise. It's supposed to be like a non-linear exploration of your concept, right? And it all comes from this one place, top-down shooter, and then you create these high-level themes, and then the game just kind of designs itself from there. All right, so I'm going to jump over real quick to survival. Okay, so there's a couple ways that we could convey survival, and just read a lot of design books because creating scarcity in items, creating intimidating enemies, all those things are things that lead into the desire to survive and increasing the stakes. And so for this particular game, maybe for survival, I say, okay, let's say we have um, just a small health bar, right? That's one way we can go, right? To where you get hit a couple times and you're done for. Or we can convey survival by, like, no matter what starting health is, maybe there are no health pickups. Maybe the health that you have at the beginning of the game is what you have for the entirety of the game. And so it's all about creating tension and the desire to survive because you know that there is no help on the way. Or what if we just say, hey, no health at all? Then that really, really increases the stakes. So essentially, no health equals one hit death. All right. So when I think about one hit death, that makes me think of games like Super Meat Boy, or other games like, or hell, even Contra, where it's very unforgiving in the lives, right? You get one hit before you die, and then, like, for instance, the penalty is different in Super Meat Boy versus Contra, for instance. Like, the penalty in Contra is like you lose your weapons, and you go back to your standard pea shooter, and also you lose a life, and unless you use the 30 lives code, you know how hard that game really is to beat, and so it's a pretty intense penalty. Super Meat Boy, it's kind of like no real penalty at all. I mean, as soon as you die, you kind of come back to life, um, and there's a certain playfulness about it. So if I think, okay, no health, one hit death, is that going to satisfy my desires? Right? Maybe I don't want a game that feels like that. You know, um, staggered. If I expect this game to be very arcadey, where I fight waves of enemies, it's going to ramp up the intensity. I'm probably going to die quite a bit. And what if I don't want that to happen? All right. Okay. Well, maybe from here I branch out into something completely unexpected. So um, because it's tied to my theme of zombies, maybe I can branch off and say, okay, how about when I die, right? I start back at the beginning of the level, but the former playthrough becomes a zombie. So actually, every single time I die, I have to fight myself in the next playthrough, right? And essentially, the further I got in the level and the stronger I was, the harder I'm going to be able to kill myself the next time. So we could say resurrection as an enemy, right? And that kind of implies like, maybe the game is one of these like kind of like endless games that keeps going on and on and on and on, and each time you die you are resurrected, but you have to fight yourself in that next playthrough. And that's kind of cool. That's kind of unexpected. That's not at all what I set out to do when I first said I'm going to make a top-down zombie killing game. And and that's really cool. And that implies other things. That implies um, amplification of difficulty based on your performance. So if you were following what I just said, each time you play the game, theoretically you're getting better at the game and you're getting further in the level. But each time you die, you have to fight yourself the next playthrough. And the further you got, the more powerful you were, means the more powerful the enemies you're going to be fighting the next time. And so, again, that's kind of an innovative concept that kind of just came out of this brainstorming, um, and uh, and ultimately, I'm just going to do some self-editing right now. That seems like a lot more complicated than I really set out to do. And while it's a really cool idea, I'm just gonna kill it, right? You got to learn how to self-edit. So, it's cool to like keep it on the table here, just so what other directions you could have gone. But ultimately, this doesn't really tie into what I want out of survival. So I'm going to leave it there, but it's essentially going to be dead. All right. So let's move on to this last bucket that I created. This enemies bucket, right? So you know that there's enemies in your game, and I implied that we were gonna fight waves of enemies. So if they're zombies, right? Do we say are there different types? You know, you can put a question mark because maybe you're leaving yourself a question to answer later. Are there different types of zombies? Um, uh, are the zombies one hit kill? Are they one hit kill? um, or do they take multiple hits? And that decision right there can influence another system that I didn't even build yet. I'll do that in just a second. So multiple hits. All right. So real quick, again, non-linear. You don't have to flesh out that idea all the way. You can come back to it later. So all this time I've been building out this game, but I haven't even defined what my player is going to do, right? So player, obviously, since it's the top-down game, we're going to have some form of control. But there are different ways to do this. Are we going to do twin stick? Are we going to make a twin stick control scheme where the left stick controls 360-degree, movement, while the other stick controls 360-degree shooting angle? Are we going to have that type of game, or is this going to be a standard 8-way D-pad with shoot button? That's kind of a more traditional arcade style control scheme, where essentially you use a virtual D-pad or a virtual analog stick that has 8 degrees of movement, and then you have a button on screen that you can press to shoot, and you'll shoot in the direction you're facing. Now, I've already established that I want this game to be arcadey, so I'm going to knock twin stick control right out of the running, just because I already know that 8-way D-pad with a shoot button is going to fulfill my needs up front. So, okay, so now we got traps, we got hazards, we got enemies that potentially there could be different types. Potentially they could take more than one hit to kill. So now we start to think, okay, are there weapons in this game? Okay, and if there are weapons, what's my means of getting them? Do we have um, essentially one weapon at a time? Are there weapon pickups where as soon as you get a new weapon, it replaces your old weapon? Or do we have essentially a weapon inventory? All right, we have a weapon inventory. And this also implies other things. Is there a weapon shop? Is there ammo? Do you have to manage ammo? Do you have to, you start to see how, again, one thought can lead to another thought. Is there ammo, right? Is there a shop? If there's shop, is there currency in the game? Are there currency pickups, right? And all of this is kind of just flowing out organically, right? We're not designing the final game right now. We're just covering all the bases. We're covering all the what ifs. And if you do it in this way where you're creating essentially a hierarchy for yourself, you can backtrack and you can see where you got to one place. So if I say, wow, how did I get to currency? I can go, oh, I got to currency because I asked, is there a shop? I asked, is there a shop because is there ammo in weapon inventory to essentially buy these items, right? And why do I have weapons? Oh, because there could be potentially different types of zombies. And it's all about being able to understand how you got to where you got to, because ultimately it all leads back up to this high level set of concepts, right? So this is your genre and POV, and then these are your high level themes. And everything has to tie back to the high level themes. And you have a really good design on your hand when you come up with a series of components that start to overlap, right? That's when you know you've got a really tightly knit sequence of ideas, right? So we have stuff in the environment kind of brainstorming that implies things that have influence over our scoring system and our enemy design, as well as our player design. And when you have that type of overlap between the buckets, you know you have a very good design on your hands. And it's really important to know that you have a good design on your hands before you've done any work, because you save yourself a whole lot of time. Let me see if there's anything else that I can kind of pump out of this exercise before we kind of move on to the conclusion and the open Q&A. And if anyone's interested, I could totally make this Illustrator file available to you for your own editing, if you wanted to use it as a template for your own kind of thought mapping. But hopefully everyone who's kind of watching this webinar right now understands what I just did, and understands that if you didn't already know how to do this, that this can totally help you get to the finish line much, much faster. And it really, really is going to help prevent you guys from getting halfway through your game before you realized, oh no, I didn't design my scoring system in a way that allows me to have this really cool combo mechanic that I really, really have to have now. And what's cool is when you start to brainstorm all this out and you see the hierarchy here, you might very clearly be able to start, knocking stuff out. So I'm going to say this game, just for the sake of example, I'm going to say we're going to create survival by having no health pickups, right? And we are going to have a combo system, but there's no bonus points. Essentially, there's just a multiplier on the basic set of points for combos. And we're going to say we are going to do, let me see here, what else can I cut? I don't want there to be ammo, because that's tedious. Instead, I want there to be a automatically refilling bar. Then I put refilling, and then that way it's almost like a heating slash cooldown bar. So then that way you seemingly have infinite ammo. You just have to do some light management, right? And that's what it does, is it keeps your focus on killing enemies. It doesn't keep your focus on seeking out resources to kill them, which can get in the way of that kind of fast-paced arcade experience. So if we looked at this right now, like, that's a game. You could totally take this and turn it into a full-on design document that fleshes out every single one of these components into a paragraph or an entire page of specific system design. And then from here, you can visualize this with art at this point. You could turn this over to a concept artist And that concept artist can turn every single one of these ideas into a piece of visualization, art, or even an actual in-game graphic that you can then use for your final game. Um, and so hopefully this was a helpful exercise for you guys to see. This is, certainly not the most involved thought map I've ever made in my life. But hopefully it shows you guys, I guess, the potential of being able to brainstorm in a visual way that also allows you to move things around and edit. It's all about having the self-control to cut what isn't necessary. And that's one of the hardest things. I got to tell you up front. I mean, I've made a lot of games, but some of the earliest games I made, I didn't have the discipline to cut the things that did not need to be there. And the reason why you have to have that discipline is because it will distract you. It'll distract you away from your overall goal of finishing the game, right? So each new element that you add to your game, you're adding time, you're adding assets, you're adding, testing. Each one of the systems you create, you have to make sure is awesome. And it's better to have fewer systems that are 100% functional than a million systems that are all broken. So if there's any takeaway from this, uh, please remember what I just said. Like, it's better to have 100% working systems, even if there's fewer of them, than to have everything in your game and have it all be broken. So let me switch back over to the presentation here. Let me see if there's anything before. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm going to leave you guys with a few thoughts, right? Games, there's no formula. There's no one formula to making a game successful, and so it's a little science. There are some things that you can expect, and there are some things that are predictable, but there's a lot of things that you can't predict. And so the best thing to do is to just make as many games as you can. Don't ever stop making games, even if you're away from the computer. Always be thinking about games. Always be playing games. Always be writing down your ideas. That's the worst part is when you have a great idea and you don't jot it down and you don't put it in a way that you can remember it later and then you lose it. That happens to me and I hate it. I hate when it happens because every idea is a hit game in the making. So try not to design in a bubble. You have to be aware of what's going on around you. You have to be aware of the the other designers that exist in the world because yes, it can feel competitive at times, and everybody wants to be very special and be recognized for being special at what they do. But it takes humility to look at someone else's work, appreciate it, and give them the credit that they're due for coming up with something really, really good, even if it is derivative. And you have to understand what works about other people's designs because it'll help you. It'll help you in your own designs. I don't expect you guys to design games the exact way that I design games, but hopefully you can appreciate where I'm coming from and take what works about what I've shown you and integrate it into your own flow. So I imagine everyone here is a GameSalad user, and I'll tell you, I've used so many tools in my time making games, everything from Flash to the Torque suite of tools to Unity to Unreal, um, and also proprietary tools. And I'll tell you right now, I was a GameSalad user before I worked for GameSalad, and GameSalad has changed my life. It hopefully is changing your life, and you're hopefully getting results faster than you've ever gotten them before, and you feel empowered to make whatever game you want. So I applaud you all because you have the advantage right now over so many designers and developers because you can visualize and prototype your ideas faster than anyone on the planet without having to learn any code. So good for you. Um, Understand that your experience as a designer is cumulative, and it's really, I mean, it is. It's like being an artist or a musician, or well, yeah, it's like being a programmer too. Every piece of work that you do is going to make the next thing you do even better. So if you didn't fulfill all of your goals in one game and you put it out and it's not perfect, don't beat yourself up about it because you can always try again and you can take what worked the last time and dump what didn't work. It's, no one's perfect. I'm certainly not perfect. I've never made a perfect game in my life. Um, but each time I make a game, it gets better. Each time it gets faster, and you can use all that extra time to test. I've come to value the QA process so much because it's like I said, it's better to have 100% functioning systems than everything broken. No matter how good the art is, after a while, people will ignore the art if the game is unplayable. So definitely start to value um, polish in the gameplay. And just keep making games because each one's going to be better than the last one. And so the last thought here is just patience. Be patient with yourself, even though you're moving a lot faster because you're using GameSalad. Um, and maybe with these new techniques that I've shown you, maybe you're moving faster as a designer. It still takes time. A good. What is it? What's the saying? Like a good cake takes time to bake.
Sure.
Or I just made that up. That sounds like a quote. Um, and you don't want to take it out of the oven before it's baked. So keep yourself disciplined, but stay patient. It's a process, and like I said, not everyone is cut out to do it, and you may not get the results you want immediately. And it's just all about knowing that this is the life that you've chosen. This is a lifestyle. It's an obsession, right? And you're going to stick with it, right? No matter what. Even if you fail spectacularly, you're going to be able to take that experience into the next game and make it amazing. And so I'm really, really expecting great things from everyone on the webinar right now. And that's the end of my presentation. I really apologize for having to gloss over so much. I mean, they teach game design courses in colleges for multiple semesters, and I've tried to sum it up in a 1 hour session. So forgive me for not covering every single topic, but hopefully the things that I did cover were meaningful to you, and I'm eager to start the Q&A session now. So let's see.
I'm eager to start the Q&A session too.
Cool.
Okay. We got a lot of good questions.
Awesome.
All
Fire
right.
away.
Let me get them queued up here. And you guys can continue to send in questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep this going
while we're going through the ones here in the beginning.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so first question. This kind of goes back to the beginning of the presentation, talking about kind of where to start. So do you want to start with early considerations from what the market wants or what the market is dictating right now? Or do you want to make a game from A to Z just because you believe in it, even when you're uncertain of what the financial outcome would be?
That's a personal choice, and both are valid. You can start from scratch just for the heck of it because you're awesome and you want to do something completely original. But if it just depends on what your motivations are. If you're motivated by, again, coming up with a form of self-expression, because games are they're not a unique medium in the sense, but like they're becoming a unique medium now that more and more people are seeing the artistic potential of the game media. But games have the potential to be works of art just as much as they have the potential to be a business vehicle. So it just depends on what your motivations are. If you want to make a work of art, I would say, be inspired by other games that are considered works of art, but then follow your own intuition as to how you want to express yourself through a game. And if you have a game that's about fear and isolation, there are ways that you can actually create game mechanics that create fear and isolation in the player. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And I think I should follow up with like a blog that actually break down game mechanics into like emotional correlations. But if you are business oriented, if you actually in games because games are fun to do, but there's also a lot of money involved, then definitely do your research. The last thing you want to do is give the audience something that they already have. And have access to. But what you can do is learn about what makes games like Farmville or Diner Dash and Peggle and Bejeweled. Learn what about, or even slot machines, right? Learn what about those games people are attracted to and why they're so enticed to spend money. Because if that's your motivation, it's great. People have done the work for you. You know what I mean? Like you can go out there and mimic a game mechanic, but give it a different coat of paint, and all of a sudden you have almost as much potential to create revenue as those other games if you also have some marketing to back it up. But yeah, it just really depends on what your motivations are.
Good. Okay, so this is another advice type question, kind of similar, talking about kind of visual elements of games. So visually, should you sort of try to follow the graphic style of successful games like Angry Birds, etc., regardless of the game mechanics because it's attractive to the general public, or should you just do whatever you feel like doing?
I would advise against tying a game style kind of on its own to why people like it. Angry Birds is a great combination of art, character design, and then sticky gameplay. Um, Stuff that really anyone can pick up. It's so tactile, and I think it has equal parts to do with the presentation as it does with the mechanic. Now, if you were going to follow, if you were going to make a Diablo style game, you obviously wouldn't want to give it an Angry Birds look and feel, because you'd actually be alienating the audience that's attracted to that game. So the person who's going to play Angry Birds is not going to play a hardcore RPG game, and you probably shouldn't try to shoehorn, a graphic style that's not going to appeal to a core audience, right? Always think about the core that you can always depend on, and then try to expand out from there. Angry Birds is a physics-based game. Physics-based games inherently are casual and really broad in their audience and their scope. And so, you can go toony and satisfy a lot of that core audience, and then attract the people who are not typically gamers. But yeah, so I would say it really depends on the genre. If the person who's asking the question, if you're doing a casual game, um, a game that has kind of a simple control scheme and kind of a simple game progression, something that's not too involved, I would say go for it. Go for something really really cartoony and appealing to that broad audience. But if you're going for like a hardcore game, something like a shooter or something like an isometric RPG or even a side-scrolling RPG, um, go go with something that makes more sense for that genre, like maybe a grittier art style or something that looks even something more like anime. Uh, just real quick, how we tie that in. I mean, not everyone understood why we went with a super pixelated art style for Battle Legend Infinity, but that was a core decision based on the intended audience. That game is all about retro love, and we literally could not pull it off unless we went like honest to goodness pixel art. So understand what the implication is for the genre that you're tackling, and then satisfy your core audience first, and then expand from there.
Okay. While you were answering that question, we got a couple more in just about kind of art style and visual appearance of games.
Sure.
So one question is, do you have any recommendations for animations and artwork? So I guess, if the individual is not artistically talented, what would you suggest?
I would say I actually use this more as a convenience, because frame by frame animation is just like it's time consuming because you have to draw each one of those things. I use After Effects to do most of my animation, including character animation. What I'll do is I'll create a source frame, essentially a source keyframe in Illustrator. People who are not good at kind of creating graphics from scratch, you can either acquire art for free online, rip a sprite, or get something from Marketplace. But you can actually take one frame of character into After Effects and use a puppeteering system that they have built in to create an entire like walk cycle, all without having to be essentially a great frame by frame animator. You do have to know some of the components of motion and keyframing, but it's a very quick and easy way to get something moving, even from just a static image. People who use Flash are in the same boat. You can take one graphic and use tweening to bring motion to it. I'm not sure if that's a question being asked. We've also done quite a lot of 3D rendering. So we have full on, using programs like 3ds Max, we'll have 3D models that have animations, and we'll render out those animations and bring them to GameSalad. And you know, so again, unless they want to give clarification to the question, you can bring in animation from any source.
Like GameSalad Marketplace.
You can do it from GameSalad Marketplace. And you can do it from, I mean, I think even SketchUp, you can generate renderings. And if you say, if you wanted like a rotating cube, for instance, you could literally take a solid model and render it out from different angles, bring it into GameSalad and run it together as an anim strip, and it'll just look like the cube's rotating. So you can really use a number of packages, just as long as the output is a PNG file.
Okay, again, another art question.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, this individual says, I like to wait on art until I have all the game mechanics working. Do you think that this is, like a good, legitimate process, or would you recommend starting to plug in artwork early on to see how things evolve?
Um, that's a really good question. Um, I would say that if you have art on hand, it's not a bad idea to plug in a few elements just so that you know, like from like a visual balancing perspective, it's nice to know that you've built all the things you need. Like for instance, if your character is blending too much on the background, you need to know that, at some point, because whoever's handling the art is going to have to make considerations based on that. One thing that might be good is just, rather than create an entire art package and plugging it in, have you yourself or an artist create essentially a screen composition, right? Know upfront kind of what your visuals may end up looking like, even if it's just one static image, and even if it deviates a little bit, because it does affect how you build your mechanics in the game. But to be honest with you, I actually think building out your entire game as much as possible, even without art, lets you know if the game is fun with white boxes, if the game can work with white boxes or just colored boxes, like you literally know that you have a good game on your hands. Like if it requires zero art to be compelling and to be fun, it doesn't matter what the art looks like. It's going to be fun, right? Though I would say try to pair good gameplay with good art. But for this specific question, I would say if you don't have art up front, at the very least try to get some sort of composition created. And what I've done in the past is I've even, if I don't have the time to paint something or to create illustrations or sketches, I'll actually take images from Google from other games. If I know kind of what I'm after, I can take images from Google and splice them up in Photoshop and just put together essentially a test composition, um, just so I know what elements will be present so that I know to make those white boxes, right? And then later on you can plug them in and kind of test as you go. Having a game that's pretty much all functional as white boxes is great because you can ship it off to the artist and they can start to plug in art on their own and test to see if it works. Because if it doesn't, it cuts out the middleman. They'll know to update frames to make the art better without you having to tell them. And I don't know if you've ever tried to, work with an artist who's very passionate about their work. Anytime you come with a change, there's a potential to make them unhappy. And let's try to make everyone happy.
Okay. Next question. Um, Give me an advice question. Will you work on a game until you're fully pleased with the result, or will you release it based on time or financial pressure and hope to update it later if sales are successful? And then
I
the question goes on to say, I know you should never release a game if you don't find it amazing, but sometimes money and time do play into it.
Sometimes is,
What do you do?
unless you're rich, sometimes is actually all times. Money and time or money. Time is money, so technically they can be treated the same. Little industry secret. I mean, that's how every project goes. Very seldom, unless you're Blizzard, very seldom does any project ship as the perfectly executed version of what the design intention was. Business, especially with AAA games, but even in the mobile space, business drives the development schedule of a game. I've never shipped a game that had everything that I wanted in it, and that's just, I mean, what in the same at the same token, I've never created a piece of art that had everything that I wanted in it either. At some point, you have to draw the line, and like when a producer comes at you and says, "Hey," or even yourself if you're self-produced. If they come and say, "Oh my God, I really have to ship this game in time to hit Thanksgiving," or "I really have to ship this game before my kid is out for the summer." There's so many different things can dictate your schedule. At that point, it's like going back to your thought map and having the discipline to cut features, right? Being able to know my game, what the meat is, right? My game can live with two worlds instead of three. My game can live with one background track instead of 50. My game can live with a simplified control scheme, right? Because I don't have the time to flesh it all out. My game can live without 10 weapons, right? I can get away with 3. It's knowing where you can make those cuts, because if you're unable to make those cuts, what'll end up happening is you're going to try to cram everything into that short amount of time, and nothing will be polished. So you can put everything in the kitchen sink in your game and shove it out the door, but it will lack the polish to be special in your players' eyes. I mean, it's a very, very competitive field right now, and it's better to be polished than it is to have tons of levels or tons of gameplay that no one will ever get to experience because the polish is a barrier.
Um, Next question says, do you know of any good ways to come up with a truly original core game mechanic? Many game mechanics that I tend to think of have already been used.
Right. Well, I think in that regard, it's better to if you're, you can't force innovation. Um, hopefully, what some of y'all gathered as I was doing the thought mapping exercise was that innovation comes organically, right? Innovation comes from stream of consciousness, and um, don't start your if you really want to be innovative, don't start with like what's already been done before. Like start with a high level concept that is not a technical one. Say, I want to make a game that makes people feel self conscious, right? Like that's kind of no one's really made a game that actually pulls that off. I mean, that's pretty innovative, right? But that's not a mechanic. That's not a core mechanic. And then you can go from there to create a system of mechanics that fulfill that theme, and all of a sudden you've got innovation. Innovation is execution on an idea that no one's really had, right? Innovation is not necessarily mechanics, because you're right. We are limited to the devices that we have. We're limited to the touchscreen devices. We're limited to desktop. We're limited to so many things, and it's very hard to manufacture innovation when you think of the technical restraints. So think outside of the technical restraints to the metaphysical restraints, right? The conceptual, not even restraints, the conceptual possibilities, right? Look what hasn't been done before, right? We have empowerment via weapons handling. Right? There's a lot of first-person shooters, a lot of first-person racers, there's a lot of fighting games. A lot of those things are about empowerment in various ways. But what if we turned it on its side and made it less about empowerment and more about being conscious of your actions, right? Because people don't explore that. So I would say seek out innovation at the conceptual level as opposed to the mechanical level, and then take advantage of what you do know about mechanics to reinforce your theme.
Okay. Um, so according to you, Billy, when is a good time to stop the paper design process and start the coding process?
Uh, when you are satisfied with your thought map. Like, people can go straight to the coding from their thought map, but if you're in a collaborative environment, typically where like the designer is separate from the coder, typically the designer would then have to organize their thought map into an actual sort of like document, something that was a little bit more fleshed out. Because the thought map, what's great about the thought map is it's really fast because it's shorthand, right? It's shorthand for yourself. You know how you think, and so you verbalize or you visualize these thoughts in a way that you can understand. So if you're doing your own code, you literally can go straight to the coding after you've organized your thought map and you're satisfied and you've made your edits. Otherwise, I would suggest if you're in a collaborative environment where you're not actually doing the coding yourself, um, I would put this into a document. Now, if you get to a point with your thought map where you think you're satisfied but you're not quite sure, I would say you yourself can jump into GameSalad and kind of test the waters, kind of play around with some of these ideas in a playable form, because you can then turn that test project over to your coder along with your thought map or along with your design document, and give them a much, much more clear understanding of where you're coming from, so that you can get expected results back from them. So that's where I would say.
Cool. Um, all right. In many games, there's need to make actors to change layers during gameplay. In GameSalad, we're forced to think of a workaround that sometimes are not very performant efficient.
Yep.
Um, what kind of suggestions would you give about kind of the ability to do dynamic change during gameplay?
I imagine in the depth, right, in the layer and the
Mm-hmm.
sorting. Um, there are a couple tricks you can do. The first thing I would think of, and believe me, everyone, this is something that I've been asking from the dev team for over a year now, is to have some way of doing dynamic layering. There's a couple ways that we plan on tackling it. It is on the roadmap. So, I would say if you have any killer ideas for isometric games or games that have multiplanar 2D side scrolling, put it in the back pocket. Just wait until it's ready. Otherwise, really ask yourself, can your idea be pulled off in a flat side scrolling or a top down? Because if it can, I would say you can move forward on your other themes and mechanics and just kind of change your perspective. But if multiplanar 2D side scrolling is a requirement, um, I really can't in good consciousness tell you to try to tackle it right now, just because I know how hard and how really frustrating it was for us when we made Hobo with a Shotgun. And that game we made, I like to think of that game as the ET of our generation because it's a licensed product. We had 5 weeks to do it. We spent 3 weeks battling with the technology, and then essentially 2 weeks putting it together. And it's like a full game. It's got 3 whole levels. It's got enemies. It's got bosses. It's like my worst game ever, and it's because of all the things that we were forced to do because of our client. We were forced to try to put in everything in the kitchen sink rather than focus on a couple core elements. And I urged them to make it a flat 2D game, but they really wanted a multiplanar 2D game. So we were at the whim of a client, but we were fighting the clock, and at the end, everyone lost because we could not execute on the demands. Right. So I would say if you absolutely have to do isometric or multiplanar, just wait a couple more months. I hate to ask, but just wait a couple more months.
Okay. Um, so, question: if you find that your game is amazing for its mechanics, graphics, etc., but you release it and sales are not good, will you try to adapt it after the release for further updates, depending on what the gaming community and reviewers are telling you, or do you suggest dropping it and moving to the next game and next idea?
It depends on what kind of developer you are, and I know we're coming at the end of our time. But, are we allowed to go a little long?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm fine answering questions as long as people are wanting. Okay, so this question, it depends on what your motivations are. Some folks are, I won't say they're ADD, but they have more ideas in their head than they have time to do, and so what they'll do is they'll put a game out and they'll let it run its course, and they're already on to the next game, right? Um, Different designers are going to do different things. Some designers are all about perfecting their work, taking feedback, and fine tuning it with updates and updates. And the app stores are really nice about that, right? They allow you to update your game. You can take that feedback, you can take that criticism, or you can implement new features that are being rolled out with each version of GameSalad, right? If you're that kind of developer, I would say yes, absolutely. Take all the feedback you can. If you don't play test your game with people outside of your friend circle before you release it, then the critics, right, the criticism, the reviews are essentially that. It's people who have tested your game and are giving you valuable feedback. Even if they're bashing your game, I mean, you have to have thick skin about this, right? So a certain type of designer is going to want to continue to tweak to perfection, because even Angry Birds wasn't a perfect game. They actually tweaked that game a couple updates before it became the hit that it became. And it's not just the game, though. I mean, there's a whole marketing component, right? So many of us don't have the means to market on the level of Rovio and EA and Chilingo, and it's very, very hard for us to compete. So I would say do grassroots as much as you can. Try to be active on our forums. Try to be active on Touch Arcade forums. There's so many places where you can get a following. And I would say don't be bashful. The earlier you can show your game to get feedback, the better, because before you release it to the public, you have time, right? You have time to implement stuff. And don't be hurt. Don't get your feelings hurt if someone says they don't get it. They don't understand. You know what I mean? Like, games are very interpretive. Like, your thoughts and your intention may not be understood by other people, and you have to understand that, when you're sharing it with the world, everyone's entitled to their opinion. So have some thick skin and take what's valuable to you, take that valuable feedback, make your game better. Otherwise, you may be a quantity type developer where you just want to explore an idea, get it out there, and move on to the next idea. And to be honest with you, both are completely valid. Both have opportunities to succeed financially, because the person who's going to keep trying stuff, that's the person who has the blindfold on and is just throwing darts at the dartboard. And you know what? Eventually they're going to hit a bullseye. Like that's just the truth of the matter. It's like the more times you cast your reel, the more opportunities you have to pull in a trophy fish, or you could just fine tune your game. Like if you threw the dart out and it was, on the edge of the dartboard, and you tweak it, you're moving that dart closer to the center, right? Will you ever actually hit the bullseye? I don't know, maybe. But those are two different approaches to success, and I say both are valid. You just have to know yourself. You have to know what you're after. but yeah, I mean, like we're gonna do an update to Battle Legend based on feedback. Our new game that we're working on, we've already gotten some internal feedback that's fundamentally shifted the focus of the game. And I say those are the types of things you can change easier earlier rather than later. Next question.
Next question. When you have a game that is a 2D side scroller with some depth, such as Final Fight, do you have to make the player or actor smaller when they travel deeper into the scene in order to achieve the 3D effect?
That is completely up to you. When you think about feedback to the player, okay, so I don't know if you know about like perspective and like visual tricks. When you have a game that's a 40 like a 45 degree or near a 45-degree angle tilt, like a Final Fight or like a Simpsons Arcade or any number of those brawlers, the actual implied depth of the screen is very shallow. So you actually don't have to scale, and it's recommended not to. Otherwise, you'll get really unexpected results when like this person who literally was 2 feet in front of a trash can is scaled down, and now they look like a dwarf next to the trash can or something. You know, it throws people off, and it doesn't give them the visual feedback that they need to know where they actually land in the depth plane. Now, if you really wanted to pull off really far depth versus really near depth, your angle would be a lot closer to something like a 10 to 15 degree angle where you would only hardly see um, like the depth, right? So like rather than that street that takes up half the screen because it's tilted up very, in a severe way, you have a street that's tilted um, much more narrow. And the problem with that is it's going to be a lot harder for the player to know where they actually lie in the depth plane. Even if you do scale, they don't have as much visual feedback, and because of that, they might become a lot more frustrated. What I would suggest, if you really want to pull off a depth effect, if you've played the latest Rayman, or if you've played the latest Donkey Kong Country Returns on Wii, what they do is rather than have multiplanar like in and out of the depth like Final Fight, what they have is they have like two platforming planes, right? They have like a very far back platforming plane that's a flat 2D plane, and a very far front platforming plane. And at moments you switch between the two, and then the scale gets very severe. And what it does is it pulls off this amazing depth trick that makes you feel like you're really far back in the environment. So I would not suggest scaling if you have essentially a 30 to 45-degree angle like Final Fight, and only scale at much more severe world tilts.
Okay. Do you design a game independently of the tools you have to make it, or do you take into consideration the limitations of the software you have and design a game based on those limitations? And the limitations could be software or technical or just knowledge limitations.
That's a good question because I've done both. I've done designs where I've designed completely separate from the technology versus designing for the technology. If you know the technology that you're going to use, you're actually at a benefit because up front you can help edit your expectations for the output. So I'm for instance, because I use GameSalad every single day and I know what GameSalad can and can't do, um, that influences my design for sure. But when I was an independent, when I ran my independent studio and we were doing stuff for iOS as well as stuff for like XNA and PC and Mac desktop, like we used so many different platforms that it really didn't make as much sense to limit myself to the technology of just one platform. What I would do is I would come up with a core concept and a core design, and then we would start to evaluate the core design against the technology and then find some sort of happy middle ground. I would say you are at an advantage if you know your technology that you're building for. And the nice thing about GameSalad is you actually don't have to worry about limitations beyond the GameSalad feature set because we are a fully portable platform for all of the devices that we publish out to. So um, I would say there is a benefit. What was the other part of the question?
Um, about the limitations of the software or designing a game based on limitations like technical or
Uh,
knowledge
I'll tell you. So
limitations.
so the benefits of designing away from the technology means that you're more free. You're more free as a designer to come up with um, just a thought map that takes you in really really wild places. Like you literally have no limitations, and that could be very very enjoyable for you, and it could be very very free, offer you a lot of freedom, and it can make you a great designer because you can start to understand your own thought process. But I will say that if you really want predictable results, and I'll tell you, after making so many games, being able to predict your outcome, especially when you're spending other people's money, is a skill that you just have to have as a professional. I would say understanding your technology is a key component of getting predictable results.
Cool. Next question. Level design is probably one of the hardest things in game creation, at least for this person.
Mm-hmm.
How do you suggest overcoming the problem of level design?
Start small. Um, let's say, actually, people can probably still find it online. I made a series of demos for a puzzle platformer called Box Macabre, and my approach to designing levels was to create, essentially, I call them snippets, is to essentially know what my player can and can't do. So if it's a 2D side-scrolling platform, like let's say it's a Metroidvania style game, right? So you have full exploration of a world, and you want to make sure that every room in that world is meaningful. Uh, but you have to also know what the player can and can't do. Can the player jump? Can they double jump? Can they duck? Can they roll? Can they shoot things to destroy the environment? So I'd say start small. Start with like, okay, the player can jump. Why would you need to jump? Okay, there are obstacles in my way that I have to jump over. There are enemies that, walk straight at me and I want to jump over them. Oh, and maybe I can hit them from the top. I would say don't try to design an entire level first. Try to think of snippets, right? A snippet would be like, let's say I can visualize this right now. Um, like, let's say I know that my character can just jump, right? So a snippet would be, okay, so I know that I have a much bigger level than this, but a snippet would deal like this, right? So the first part of my level, I want the player to learn the core jumping mechanic in order to, like progress through the game. So what you might do is in Mario, this is like literally an exercise taken straight from Mario. Mario teaches you how to play the game within the first screen, and it's brilliant. And there's actually some white papers that have been written on it, and it's awesome. So like let's say I have my character right here, and we know that they can jump, right? So first of all, when I start a level design, I'm like, okay, well, how am I going to teach this person to jump? They're going to walk straight forward, and they're going to hit something that they can't cross, right? Oh, but they know that they can jump, right? So they're going to jump over it. And now you can't just jump over one obstacle to get to the next. You have to jump on this to get to this one. And so you start to think as your player move set becomes more increased, you start to be able to mix and match. So if I say my character can grab, right? Not only can they punch, but they can also grab certain ledges, right? So like let's say I know that I want to get up to this ledge, and so you create a level snippet that forces the player to combine their powers, right? So I can, you know, jump, 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 and then jump up here, and then grab the ledge and get on top of the ledge. So it's all about knowing what your player can do, and then this can only be like one tiny tiny part of your level, and then you take this snippet and you essentially just copy it into your level, and you kind of build your level non-linearly around those snippets, and then all of a sudden you've got a really really cool level design, level layout. That's one way to do it. That's a way to do it on paper. To be honest with you, level design is something that comes from experience, and if you already have all your mechanics in your game already set up and ready to go, what you might want to do is have a test scene in GameSalad and just throw stuff at the wall. Just lay out the components of your level and play through it. If it's fun, awesome. Save it as a snippet and recreate it in the scene that you want it to go in. And then just keep doing that. Just keep trying to figure out cool different scenarios that you can mix and match your player's game mechanics with, and then all of a sudden you've created a really really compelling environment moment to moment for your player. That's what's really cool about snippets is you're ensuring that there is a goal that is built around the mechanics for the player, and then if you pace those snippets at a good pace between each other, all of a sudden the player has really really good, meaningful moment to moment gameplay, and I think that that's a really good approach to level design. What next?
What next? Back to kind of going back to the beginning of your presentation, are there any other books that you would recommend that they read about game design?
Um,
I said, if you have you ever heard of the book called Level Up?
yes,
Is that worth a read?
I've never read it myself, so I can't fully recommend it. Um, I would say I know in academia, Jesse Shell's book is highly regarded, and there's kind of a game component where you can buy cards for it. Level Up. I'm gonna guess if someone has this person read the book.
No, I think they were asking if it was a
To be,
if it was a good read. If
I
you
would
had read
say
it.
I would say the thing about a lot of these books is like any printed material, it can become outdated and it could become inaccessible. So I actually go to design blogs and Gama Sutra especially. If you guys aren't familiar with Gama Sutra, it's just GAMASUTRA.com. They have so much good news, but right here, if you go to the feature section, like they update this every single day. Oh, I gotta recommend this Rational Design, the core of Rayman Origins. Everyone on this podcast needs to read that. It's amazing. It especially for the person who asked about level design, like their approach to designing levels goes even more specific than kind of like my approach, and it's so much. I think it's better. I mean, their approach is obviously better because they're Ubisoft. You know what I mean? They've got
Mm-hmm.
these veterans, seasoned veterans doing it. But rather than read a lot of books for kind of like text reference, I actually read a lot of Gama Sutra articles, and a lot of these articles get fleshed out and republished in like the Game Developer magazine. If anyone's a subscriber to that, so and Gama Sutra is an industry wide tool. The professionals all around the industry are looking at this and reading it, and so if you want to be up to speed with what other professionals are doing, I would say definitely put a bookmark on Gama Sutra and visit it every single day.
Cool. All
Yep.
right, I got two more questions for us. Um, so second to last one, have you caught yourself working on multiple projects at a time, or do you plow through one until it's done? And do you have any tips on managing multiple projects?
It's been almost impossible for me to focus on one project at a time, and that's both personal and career. At the slot company, I was easily handling 3 to 4 projects at any given time and putting out about 12 projects a year total. And here at GameSalad, I mean, we've juggled up to 4 projects simultaneously with our 4-person game team. Um, Professionally, it's almost impossible. Like if you work for a game company, it's almost impossible to not have at least some sort of project in the works as you're working on your main project. Because that's just how companies are. I mean, as soon as you're done with one project, you have to have something else to kind of fall back on. Otherwise, you have, unfortunately, what a lot of AAA studios experience. They finish their big project and then they let people go because they don't have the next project in the queue. And so to kind of save yourself from that particular fate, yes, it is important to have essentially some sort of knowledge as to what you're going to work on next. Um, but be responsible, right? Like put the effort into the thing that has to go out first, even if you do have multiple games on the plate. I will say this though, there is a benefit to having multiple projects going on at once. As any creative person knows, you'll get burned out. You will get burned out. The more you crunch, the more you work on one hyper focused system for one game, you will start to lose your focus for that game. And having a fallback project or a number of fallback projects to kind of keep you productive is really helpful, because what it'll do is it'll keep you from wasting time by playing games when you shouldn't, or looking at surfing the internet when you shouldn't. It keeps you kind of working and focused, but then it washes the palette clean with something new, and then you can go back to that original task and kind of finish it with kind of fresh eyes. And so it's really good to kind of clean out the fridge every once in a while with some new projects to work on. And I'll tell you the truth, we work on a lot of projects that never hit the public just because we just want to explore a concept that the current project isn't allowing us to. And so we'll stop what we're doing and kind of mess around with a new concept for a few days and then say, okay, that was cool. We got it out of our system. Now let's go back to this other thing. Um, Ultimately, it makes you more productive if you are responsible.
Good. All right. Last question. This is an easy one.
Yay.
We had someone ask just if you could list or just give everybody a rundown who might not already know the Android or iPhone games that you have made or GameSalad has made in the past so they can check them out and
Sure.
see your awesome work.
Sure. The game I made when I was 19 is called Blade of Betrayal, and that one's on iPhone, iOS, or iOS. It's on Android. I think we have a free version as well if people just kind of want to try it out for free. Um, I made a PC desktop game that's available on Big Fish Games called Bumble Tales, and I did the art for that. And we made an iPhone version, so you can get Bumble Tales. I think that one might be free now as well. And I made a follow up to that. That's a match 3 game, and I did a follow up match 3 game that I did the art for called Headstone Harry, and it kind of mixes some slot machine elements into match 3. And then from there, I did the artwork on a game called Aim for the Brain. I don't think it's on the App Store anymore, but it's whack-a-mole with zombies. Um, I did the art for The Traveler, Stanley's The Traveler game made with GameSalad. This was prior to me actually using GameSalad from a gameplay perspective. And then the first game that I touched as far as like mechanics, that would be Hobo with a Shotgun. The artwork was done by our friends at Powerhouse Animation. So this is one of the first games that I did not do the art for. And that's because I was knee deep in learning how to use GameSalad. So through the fire, I got hired by GameSalad, and our first product that we put out as Game Team One was a Popular Mechanics crossover. It's called Be the Spark. It first debuted in Popular Mechanics iPad app in September of last year, and then it came out I think in October as a standalone app. So look for Be the Spark.
And that's the one where you have the template is...
Yeah, you guys can get the free template. That one is more of a tech demo more so than a game. But I think the cool triumph of that game is that it's all like mathematically driven and driven by real world data. So it's a very, very realistic portrayal of how an engine works. And which is really cool because up until that point we hadn't done a lot of simulation with GameSalad. So my time with Game Team One for the majority of last year was doing a lot of prototyping. We're just kind of learning our way as a team and trying to prove a lot of stuff possible that people didn't think were possible. So we made an Angry Birds clone, we made a Fruit Ninja clone, we made a 3D shooter clone. I mean, we were able to do all these prototypes that haven't seen the public, but we've worked a lot of what we know about how we made those games into our actual public-facing games. We did an Alaska Airlines training game. You actually can't get the Alaska Airlines one. That was a private game. But after that, we made Two Broke Girls for iOS, which, again, I think that is not available anymore, unfortunately, because of CBS and how they do their marketing. But what we're really excited about is Battle Legend Infinity. Battle Legend Infinity was actually a game that we made in our spare time. So it's our first original IP, and it's completely driven by passion. So, again, the game has its flaws, but it is 100% like us being pure gaming, nerd enthusiasts. We love retro games. And ultimately we work for a company, right? So we had to put some in-app purchase and monetization in there. But you'll start to learn that if you work for someone else, they will make you, put elements in your game to make it profitable. And so our next game we're working on is called Raptor Storm, and we have shown it publicly at South by Southwest, but I don't know if anyone here has seen it. It's a very, 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 very robust running style game. So we're doing less innovation on the core gameplay mechanics, and we're just blowing it out of the water with presentation and production value. It's like Michael Bay, if Michael Bay made Cannibalt. So we're going ridiculous on this one. And hopefully you guys all like it. And I think that once that game's done, we can like put out some templates and kind of show people our tricks, because a lot of running games have been made with GameSalad, and we're inspired by the best of them. I mean, like I love Spooky Hooves. We're big Air Supply fans, and I think you guys should check those games out too and get inspired by them. But yeah, we're doing some things that those games didn't quite do, and we're just kind of keeping the needle pushing forward. So yeah, I don't know. I think this webinar went pretty well. I mean, I could talk about game stuff all day long, and I really think I just scratched the surface. So hopefully you guys really like what you heard, because I think we might be willing to do a lot more of this. And I've actually been thinking about doing a regular design blog where I actually go a lot more granular into each element of game design that I've been exposed to. And so, hopefully you guys are walking away with some more insight into this passion you have called game development. And hopefully we can inspire each other as we move forward with our GameSalad projects.
All right. Well, thank everybody. Thank you for attending, and thanks.
Awesome, guys. Take care.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.
Very good.